Why China can't invade Taiwan and what it means for the US dollar. An island is unassailable geography and the logistical nightmare that prevents invasion, locking the US Navy into Pacific dominance. There's a military consensus that shapes global finance, trade, and power. China cannot successfully invade Taiwan. This isn't a political wish or a morale boost. It is a geographical and logistical certainty that dictates the balance of power in the Pacific and, indirectly, the stability of the US dollar. Despite China possessing the largest navy and a formidable military, the act of conquering a developed island across a 100-mile strait is a mission of almost unthinkable complexity, often likened to a buzzsaw. The insurmountable challenges lock the US Navy into a position of long-term dominance in the Pacific, ensuring that the primary economic engine of global stability, the East Asian trade route, remains under Western influence. This is the story of Taiwan's unassailable geography, the logistical impossibility facing the People's Liberation Army, PLA, and the catastrophic economic consequences of the attempt, a risk so high it perpetually guarantees the island as autonomy and locks the existing world order into place. Chapter 1. The Great Barrier, Taiwan's unassailable geography. Taiwan's topography is its greatest military asset, transforming the island into a natural fortress against any amphibious assault. The physical reality of the island alone presents at least 8 significant challenges that an invader must overcome. The coastal paradox, few acceptable beaches. An amphibious invasion, the most difficult military maneuver in the world, requires suitable landing zones for massed troops, vehicles, and supplies. Taiwan's geography is fundamentally hostile to this requirement. Rocky cliffs and steep slopes. The majority of the island, particularly the eastern coast, is dominated by the central mountain range, where the slopes often drop steeply or straight into the sea. This prevents landings and severely limits options. The limited landing zones. Taiwan's extensive shoreline provides very few acceptable landing options. These suitable beaches are scarce, known to the defenders, and geographically dispersed. Furthermore, any success in crossing the strait means facing immediate, compounded defensive challenges on the land itself. The immediate nightmare. Urban and agricultural trap zone. Even if a beachhead is secured, the invasion force is immediately confronted by terrain designed to stall and destroy an armored breakout. Urban combat. Taiwan. Usable beaches lead either directly into a dense city or immediately into agricultural land. Landing into a city instantly triggers brutal urban warfare, which would deny the PLA the crucial time needed to build up combat power ashore. The rice paddies trap. Landing outside of cities forces armored vehicles and troops into the island as extensive agricultural land, which consists mainly of water-intensive rice paddies. Tanks and armored personnel carriers cannot easily traverse rice paddies. This forces the invader to stick to the extremely narrow road network, creating predictable choke points and making them targets. The dense population. Taiwan's flat terrain is not open space. It is densely covered by either urban development or intensive agriculture to support its nearly 24 million inhabitants. Every available inch of ground would become contested. The mountainous gauntlet. The interior topography creates formidable obstacles that restrict movement toward the ultimate objective, the capital, Taipei. The central range barrier. The central mountain range spans the length of the island, covering 60% of the land surface. This massive, craggy terrain poses a significant obstacle to any sustained ground campaign, forcing the advance along predictable, easily defended coastal routes. Taipei's natural fortress. Greater Taipei occupies a massive ancient lakebed, surrounded by mountains. The city is only accessible through narrow passes. One such pass is so narrow that the highway is elevated with opposing traffic lanes stacked vertically. This natural bottleneck creates a perfect defensive environment, turning the final approach into a long, mile-by-mile defensive fight. A contested battle over the metropolitan area, which covers 250 square kilometers with many buildings over 20 stories, is almost impossible to comprehend in scale and complexity. In short, Taiwan's geography is a defense network in itself. The island is not merely land. It is a layered defensive system where every potential landing site immediately leads to a compounded military challenge, from the shoreline to the very center of the capital. Chapter 2. The Logistical Impossibility. China's Achilles heel. Geography is only half the battle. The other, more insurmountable challenge facing the PLA is logistics. A successful large-scale invasion of Taiwan requires hundreds of thousands of troops, tens of thousands of armored vehicles, and millions of tons of supplies, all of which must be transported across a hostile strait. The PLA currently lacks the requisite logistics capabilities to support such a protracted, large-scale amphibious landing. The strait crossing, a fatal vulnerability. The 160-kilometer-wide Taiwan Strait is the single most dangerous bottleneck for the invasion force. Vulnerability of surface shipping. The only way to transport the bulk of an invasion force is with surface shipping. This huge armada of ships, necessary for moving people, vehicles, and supplies, would be extremely vulnerable. The anti-access arsenal, Taiwan, using an asymmetric warfare strategy, focuses on making an invasion prohibitively expensive. Taiwan's defense emphasizes disrupting amphibious landings through mobile missile launchers, drone swarms, and sea mines. The PLA's naval losses would undoubtedly be massive. Logistics deficits. The PLA has demonstrated deficiencies in critical areas essential for a cross-strait conflict, including strategic airlift, anti-submarine warfare, and maritime transport capabilities. Current estimates suggest logistics support for a large-scale landing and on-island operations would be needed for approximately 3 months, yet the capability for sustained resupply is questionable. The beachhead bottleneck, the uncaptured port. A modern invasion requires capturing a major port or airfield immediately to reinforce the beachhead and sustain the buildup of combat power. Limited ports. Taiwan has very few deep-water ports that could accommodate a major landing force. These facilities would be a priority target for Taiwanese defenders. The logistical choke. If a port is not rapidly captured intact, the PLA would face difficulties maintaining resupply and establishing a landing base for logistics operations. The concentration of forces necessary for a multi-echelon offensive, such as an amphibious landing campaign, makes the invaders highly susceptible to devastation by Taiwan's long-range precision munitions. The civilian integration. While China is expanding and modifying its large fleet of civilian seafaring ferries and building special purpose barges reminiscent of the D-Day Mulberry harbors, to land tanks and troops, this reliance on civilian integration has its own vulnerabilities. Using civilian ferries for mass transport would complicate targeting for Taiwan, but these are still vulnerable to a concentrated assault. The weather window, a temporal constraint. Beyond the physical and material challenges, there are severe temporal and meteorological constraints. Monsoon seasons. The Taiwan Strait is choppy, with 2 monsoon seasons making a seaborne invasion viable only for a short part of the year. This severely compresses the planning and execution window for the largest and most complex military operation in modern history. Operational experience. The PLA also suffers from a lack of operational experience in joint air and sea warfare, and studies have revealed deficiencies in high-level command decisions under unexpected conditions. This lack of practical experience, combined with the immense complexity of the operation, further limits the prospects of success. The confluence of geographic barriers, a lack of specialized amphibious logistics, and a narrow operational window makes the full-scale invasion of Taiwan a logistical impossibility, not just a military risk. Chapter 3. The Pacific Lock, U.S. Navy's geographic advantage. The logistical impossibility of the Taiwan invasion, combined with the island's strategic location, locks the U.S. Navy into a position of long-term Pacific dominance, despite China's aggressive buildup of anti-access, area denial, A2AD capabilities. The unsinkable aircraft carrier Taiwan is often described as a cork in a bottle and an unsinkable aircraft carrier. Its position is crucial for limiting Chinese expansion in the Western Pacific. The first island chain. Taiwan sits squarely in the first island chain, stretching from the Aleutian Islands to the Philippines. Control of Taiwan would allow China to project military power deep into the Pacific, threatening U.S. allies, Japan, Korea, Philippines, and challenging U.S. sea and air control within the chain. The strait's strategic value. By remaining autonomous, Taiwan compels the PLA to concentrate its forces and resources on the invasion threat, diverting them from developing wider power projection capabilities. This effectively contains China's naval reach. China's A2AD challenge, a necessary defense. China has invested heavily in a sophisticated A2AD network, a layered defensive system of long-range missiles, radars, air defenses, and cyber tools, designed to keep U.S. forces as far away from China as possible, making U.S. intervention slow and politically risky. The no-go zone. This A2AD strategy aims to make the Western Indo-Pacific a U.S. Navy no-go zone, creating de facto Chinese control over the region. The U.S. counter-strategy. The U.S. goal is not to destroy the entire A2AD network, which is too layered and dispersed, but to fracture the Chinese kill chain and create gaps in coverage. This requires a counter-A2 or AD campaign using stealth platforms, F-35, B-2, and B-21 raiders designed to penetrate heavily defended airspace, long-range precision weapons, missiles like JASSM-ER and Tomahawk to strike A2AD components from standoff distances. Undersea dominance, fast attack submarines, which are the hardest assets for China to detect and counter. The geographical veto, maintaining sea control. The physical reality of the Taiwan invasion effectively grants the U.S. a geographic veto over any successful Chinese expansion. Intervention simplicity. The U.S. simply needs to ensure the logistics chain across the Taiwan Strait is broken. Given the immense vulnerability of the PLA's surface shipping armada to U.S. submarines and long-range missiles, the U.S. Navy only needs to operate long enough to severely degrade the invasion force's ability to reinforce or resupply, making the occupation impossible. Distributed operations. The U.S. Navy is pivoting to a distributed maritime operations strategy, dispersing forces across many smaller nodes, agile combat employment, ACE. This makes U.S. forces harder to find and hit, reducing the consequences of a successful strike by the A2AD network. Allied integration. U.S. strategy relies heavily on integration with allies, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Australia, to create dispersed basing and logistically resilient operations. Taiwan's resistance acts as the core trigger for this allied response. As long as the Taiwan invasion remains a logistical and geographic impossibility, the island serves as the cornerstone of the U.S. strategy to counter A2AD, locking the U.S. Navy into a position of crucial, though contested, Pacific dominance. Chapter 4. The $5 trillion cost. Economic impossibility and trade collapse. Beyond the military and logistical constraints, the economic cost of an invasion, or even a military blockade of Taiwan, is so immense and immediately catastrophic that it serves as the ultimate deterrent, locking the existing financial order into place. The cost is measured in trillions of dollars and global economic collapse. The semiconductor choke point. Taiwan's position in the global semiconductor industry is the single greatest economic deterrent to invasion. Global dependence. Taiwan maintains about half of the world's total chip production capacity, including close to 80% of the world's most advanced chips, 70mm and under. Revenue loss. A conflict or blockade would immediately halt Taiwanese trade. Conservative estimates suggest that downstream industries, from electronics, automotive, computing, reliant on Taiwanese chips, could forgo as much as $1.6 trillion in revenue annually. Economic tsunami. Total disruption to the global economy is estimated to be over $2 trillion in a blockade scenario, with some estimates reaching $5 trillion in economic damage in the first year alone. This would represent a decline of 5% in the global economy, comparable to the 2009 global financial crisis. China's self-harm. The economic fallout would be devastating for China itself, with its economy potentially suffering a nearly 9% loss. The Chinese leadership would not take such a decision lightly. The global trade and financial freeze. A Taiwan conflict would not only halt chip production, but also severely disrupt global trade and finance, triggering a global liquidity crunch. Trade finance collapse. Risk-averse global investors would immediately pull back from lending activities, reducing the availability of trade finance. This collapse could disrupt hundreds of billions of dollars in trade, particularly trade with China, as banks reduce exposure in anticipation of financial sanctions. Supply chain collapse. Beyond chips, the disruption would affect critical infrastructure components for telecommunications, medical devices, and other industries. The disruption would be felt immediately and be difficult to reverse. Asset sell-off. Prior to a conflict, the authorities in Beijing would likely try to sell U.S. and other Western securities to avoid sanctions on those assets. This would cause temporary disruption to financial markets and lead to long-term effects, including higher price levels and increased nominal debt globally. The economic impossibility is the most powerful component of the deterrent. The financial consequences are so catastrophic for China, the U.S., and every major world economy that the risk perpetually outweighs the strategic benefit of conquest. Chapter 5. The dollar's anchor. Taiwan and the financial world order. The successful deterrence of a Taiwan invasion has profound structural consequences for the global financial system. The stability of the U.S. dollar and its reserve currency status is directly anchored to the geopolitical reality of a free and autonomous Taiwan. The trade stability guarantee. The U.S. dollar's value is fundamentally tied to its use as the primary currency for global trade and energy transactions. The trade stability guaranteed by U.S. Pacific dominance is therefore essential to the dollar's role. Safe passage, U.S. sea control, buttressed by Taiwan's defensive posture, guarantees the safety of the critical sea lanes that underpin East Asian trade. This assurance allows global trade to proceed smoothly and cheaply, denominated in the U.S. dollar. Confidence as currency. The stability and predictability guaranteed by the U.S. Navy, S dominance, are the confidence that makes the dollar the world's preferred reserve currency. The U.S. Navy effectively guarantees the global trade system, making the dollar the indispensable transactional currency. The Taiwan corollary. If China were to gain control of Taiwan, it would fracture the first island chain, allowing the PLA Navy and Air Force to project power into the Western Pacific. This would immediately inject instability and political risk into the world's most active trade routes, forcing nations to seek alternative, non-dollar-based trade financing systems. The disruption to the trade system would be the first major blow to the dollar's reserve status. The flight to safety paradox. In the immediate event of a crisis, the US dollar experiences a phenomenon known as flight to safety, risk aversion. When a major global conflict, such as a Taiwan war, erupts, investors worldwide rush to the safest perceived asset, which remains US Treasury securities. This instantaneous surge in demand temporarily strengthens the dollar and stabilizes US debt markets. The long-term cost? However, this initial stabilization comes at a long-term cost. The long-term effects of the war, global trade collapse, massive supply chain shock, higher price levels, and higher US national debt, would ultimately erode the dollar's real purchasing power. The destruction of the global trading system, which the dollar depends on, would undermine the currency's stability far more than any initial flight to safety benefit. The geopolitical insurance policy. Taiwan's geographic and logistical imperviousness acts as a permanent geopolitical insurance policy for the US financial system. Deterrence as stability. As long as a full-scale invasion is rated by analysts as a mission impossible due to the geographic, logistical, and economic buzzsaw, the deterrence holds. The deterrence prevents the massive $5 trillion economic shock and the resulting fracture of the global trading system. Strategic leverage. The necessity of defending Taiwan, coupled with the U.S. Navy's superior counter A2AD capabilities, guarantees continued American involvement and defense spending in the Pacific. This commitment, though costly, is the price of maintaining the stable trade lanes that underpin the dollar's global hegemony. In conclusion, Taiwan's geography, the narrow landing zones, the rice paddies, the mountainous terrain, and the hostile strait, prevents the largest military operation in history. This logistical lock ensures U.S. Navy dominance in the Pacific, which, in turn, guarantees the stability and safety of the global trade system. That stability is the invisible foundation upon which the U.S. dollar S status as the world S reserve currency is built. The island is not merely a strategic prize, it is the unassailable anchor of the financial world order.